And here you go. The one for Jland, which looks like I have to go on this side. The Symposium. This is the last video I'll watch tonight because it's getting late. Look, I hear ship and I think they're all fan-made anyway, so... the Jedi philosophy is an absolute mess, apparently.
Hello and welcome to the Symposium. My name's Callum and I'm going to be talking about how the Jedi philosophy is a mess of contradictions and is not internally consistent or even vaguely coherent.
Something really realistic about the expanded universe is that you have break-off factions who interpret the Jedi Code differently. So they're technically Jedi, but they're not the Orthodox Jedi Order.
Now, I'm sure you're familiar with Star Wars, and there are going to be people watching this who are much more familiar with the Star Wars lore than I am. But I did a bit of digging on various fan wikis about the history of the Jedi and the Sith and what they're
You read Wikipedia. Okay.
supposed to believe, and this is what I came away with. The Jedi seem to be a radical cult of reason, not...
Oh, if you can't see, he's got the canon tab open, not the legends tab. Anyway.
entirely dissimilar to the worldview of some of the French Revolution religious cults. They seem to be a religious order of extreme stoic jihadis who are dedicated to suppressing their own emotions so they don't fall to the dark side. They follow a doctrine of non-attachment where they have no friends, no marriage, or no family. So
no friends. Obi-Wan and Anakin are literally friends in the movie.
they are completely atomized individuals who have decided that reason alone is enough to govern men. Any concern with emotions is a concern with what they call the dark side. This is spooky and evil, but we never really understand why.
Good friend, yeah, exactly. And a good friend, exactly. And then like, you're like my brother, Anakin.
Engage with Sith arguments. The Sith are just attacked on sight. Presumably, this is to prevent the Jedi. Presumably, the reason.
And in Revenge of the Sith, good relations with the Wookiees I have.
They reject the dark side, which appears to be the side that is
you are my acquaintance, Anakin.
Concerned with the emotional, animalistic aspect of a human, rather than the sort of abstract, rational aspect of a human.
But it's not human. I mean, we anthropomorphize all of the other species that we put in fictional settings so that it's relatable to us as humans, but it's not all humans.
The reason that they prevent the Sith from doing anything, and they want to prevent the Jedi from having these family relationships,
is a 40k guy. Okay, interesting.
Is because there are emotions that push and pull you in these. These are fundamentally emotive relationships. And if you become irrational and angry, you might abuse the great power that the Jedi have in the use of the Force. But the thing is, they seem to abuse their power in pursuit of complete dominance anyway. So let's begin with just the very conception of the light side and the dark side. Just say good and bad, because these are hugely morally loaded words, especially when dealing with political factions. I mean, an objective view of the light side and the dark side of the Force would merely be the abstract and the material, or the rational and the emotional, or the reason versus empiricism, something like this, or the rational versus empirical, something like this, because they are not like inherently evil or something. As far as
he's read the canon tab too much on Wikipedia. Because I think that's a misinformation thing that people get from the new canon stuff. Yeah, the dark side isn't inherently evil, guys. But, I mean, I can see where he gets the comparison of this sort of logic and reason versus emotion from the base level, looking at the movies and that.
I can tell. They are just dealing with two different spheres of interest.
With an extra E, Lockon, but yeah.
And two different aspects of a human being. And the thing is, framing it as light side and dark side makes itself
Yeah, and then whatever additions they made and whatever. And then I don't know, because apparently they contradict themselves anyway.
justifying. We are good because we are good. They're good.
yeah.
They are bad because they are bad.
But also, they said that where the novels don't line up with the movies, they're not canon. So technically, the novels aren't canon because any additions that you can't see on screen are not canon.
And we know this because we have defined us to be light and them to be dark, and therefore you don't need to think about this. It categorizes all things into either good or bad, and all things are good on our side, and all things are bad on their side. And an example of this is a Sith Lord called Darth Plagueis the Wise, who is able to heal people and save life and whatever. And this has been placed in the bad category because he was from an emotional... This power came from his sort of emotional perspective. So we can see something...
I mean, in the Darth Plagueis novel, he's actually quite cold and calculated when he's working with the midichlorians.
It is obviously beneficial that has been placed in the bad category. Well, that's kind of silly, because A, that makes it shows that the light side doesn't have a monopoly on good things. It is not simply we are good because we define ourselves to be good, because there are actually good things that are in the category of bad. So there's some incompleteness here. There's some hypocrisy here too. And so the Sith are obviously not all bad either. So this is essentially being like a fallacy of composition. It's literal black and white thinking. And this is bad philosophy at its very finest. You can't sit there and claim to have a monopoly on truth and reason and justice, and then commit demonstrable injustices against people who are not entirely evil. And so we come to the concept of bringing balance to the Force. Now,
Anger, fear, aggression, the dark side, are they? That was in the Dark Empire comics, repeated as well.
I
Funny
don't
about
even
that.
know what this is supposed to mean. What kind of view of balance is the eradication of the opposing side? It's pretty genocidal, really, isn't it? It's quite awful when you think about it. I mean, if I bring balance to my breakfast, that doesn't mean I'm only eating one kind of food. The implication there is going to be a plurality of foods. Different.
But all of the food will be eradicated because you eat it, and it turns into something else. But none of the food will be left on the plate. Theoretically, unless you're one of those people that only eats half the food on your plate and then leave the other half.
Different kinds, and possibly in different measures, depending on the kind of food that it is, depending on what the effect of that food is. I'm not saying that it should be like 90% beans and then 5% bacon, 5% sausage or something. There's going to be a different mix of things depending on the kind of things that are mixing, depending on the differences between them.
If you don't want to eat it, don't put it on your plate. How do I unpack this? How do I talk about it? George Lucas has gone on record saying that when the light side is in power, that's when the universe is in balance. So that when the dark side's in power, that is imbalance. The balance is not you have an equal amount of light and dark side. Yeah. Palpatine literally says the dark side is a pathway to many abilities some would consider unnatural. Yeah.
The Jedi, essentially, following this doctrine of bringing balance to the Force, again, like, wiping out the competition, is essentially puts them, in my view, as like the mullahs of the Republic. Like, this is the, Islamic Republic of the Space Republic of the Jedi, or whatever. They seem to have some kind of role in government and in enforcement, but it's unclear what it is, and they appear to be accountable to nobody, and are acting purely from religious principles. And in the goal of this, they have conducted a religious war against the Sith since the inception of the Sith. The original one apparently was some chap who was a Jedi, and he had questions about the emotive side of the human being and what that is, in extension, how that fits with the Force. And so he was persecuted.
Is that really what the new canon did? Wow. Just wow.
By the Jedi for wrongthing. This literally was just ideological. They censored him and oppressed him, and he had to go into essentially a revolt against them.
And the EU is just like Riccartans. But the root of it all. Because the Force Sabers needed the use of the dark side of the Force, and that caused people to fall to the dark side in the Jedi. And then I like my fan theory to think that Dagon Locke led us to Jedi that didn't want to be restricted from using the dark side, because near the end of the Dawn of the Jedi comics they decided to not use the Force Sabers because they were leading people to the dark side and to imbalance. Because anyway, that's not the timeline he's talking about, because especially in the signing screenshot, he was reading the canon tab.
Because they were demanding that their view...
Yeah, Ashla and Bogan are the analogues for light and dark side.
...was the only view. But their view, as we have seen, is incomplete. It is not the only view. And so they are making demands that they can't satisfy, and they have become violent, tyrannical, and genocidal in the pursuit of ensuring that they are the ones who are making the decisions here. It seems to be quite an absolute view of politics. And so we get to Obi-Wan's famous statement, "Only a Sith deals in absolutes." What a bloody stupid thing for Obi-Wan to say.
People have debated this line so much and memed it. It is pretty stupid. It was stupid. But, I mean, at this point, Obi-Wan wasn't being that clear-headed and non-emotional either.
It was unreal. The sentence itself outs Obi-Wan as a Sith. Because he's saying, no, only Sith deal in absolutes. That's an absolute statement. You, therefore, must be a Sith, Obi-Wan. It's such a categorical statement. So, if you deal in absolutes, which are either or statements with no negotiation, statements that are just categorical declarations that encompass everything within the definition, then you're a Sith, and this makes you bad. But the thing is, that means the Jedi have been acting like Sith since day one. They demand their cult of reason is the only correct interpretation of the Force religion. They have imposed their Force religion on all others, fighting civil wars over it, exterminating the opposition.
And I think that's a nuance in the EU that a lot of people don't see on the surface level. It's like, it's a certain view towards the Force, it's a philosophy, but there's a difference between, like, the light side of the Force being used and the Force being used and religion in the way that, yes, obviously the Jedi's meant to represent a religious take on things, but I don't particularly view them as a religion as much as they have this power, they actually have experiential experience with it. And it's their philosophy towards the power and using it, which a lot of religions are based on other things. Because if you're talking about religions, the Sith and the Jedi agree. Because they both believe in the Force. They have different doctrines, but their base belief is the same. They both believe in the Force, and they both believe that the universe is made up of the Force, and that the universe was created by the Force and all that. And even people that aren't Jedi have believed in the Force. Prince Isolde's a good one. In Courtship of Princess Leia, coming around to believing in a light-sided point of view, like way of acting, but he's not part of the Jedi Order. I could go on.
Describing the opposition as evil, never engaging with their legitimate concerns. I was going to say censoring them, but after wiping them out, that doesn't seem so bad, does it? Seems like a lesser problem. Forbidding themselves to maintain social relationships or even acting like humans. Like, if anyone's dealing in absolutes here, it's the Jedi. They claim to be the source of absolute good, and they are not. There is bad on the side of the Jedi, and there is good on the side of the Sith. The fact that the Jedi are unwilling to engage with the Sith and not deal in absolutes and try and, I don't know, synthesize some concoction, like some view of that includes the emotional aspect of a human being, would make them as bad as they claim the Sith to be. And the thing is, I'm not even sure that, like, we've actually seen that from the Sith. I mean, from the Sith perspective, if they've been censored, they've been oppressed since day one for merely wanting to think differently to the Jedi. It seems reasonable that the Sith would then understandably want to exterminate the Jedi, because the Jedi's position against the Sith from day one was that of extermination.
I mean, if you've read the new canon tab, I don't know. But in the EU, literally they're like Dagon Lock. You can go off and have your different point of view. But then what do the Sith always end up doing? They end up killing people, they end up wanting to take over the universe, and they end up doing evil things, basically. Because the dark side is the aggression and the hate and the anger. And then they're using the Force, and so because of the power that they have from the dark side of the Force, they can establish control over things and then oppress people under them. See, this Empire... The Sith Empire, but the two separate ones. I find it interesting. The original trilogy Empire oppressed a lot of people. Had dark side people in charge. Funny about that, and all of that. You can see it in the movies.
So I'm not surprised that the Sith plot against the Jedi. And it seems that there's just, it's...
Also, note to point is Dagon Lock, and that were technically Dark Jedi. They weren't Sith, because Sith only became the Sith Order once the Dark Jedi went to Korriban and trained the Sith species in the use of the dark side of the Force, and then they became more... They came up with their own code and then became the Sith Order.
Become an irreconcilable position. But that's because the Jedi are doing nothing to try and engage with it.
Yeah, we don't see as much of the Sith Empire either. The Tenebrae Vitiate Sith Empire I'm thinking of.
But I'm sure that Sith philosophy isn't all sunshine and roses. But you've got to sympathise at least a little bit with the Sith. Because, like you say, well, but they're all evil, they're all bad guys. Well, yes, I'm sure that pro-Jedi propaganda like Star Wars would say such a thing. But what would you expect them to become? If they're going to be persecuted everywhere that they wish to practice their religion, again, don't believe in religious toleration at all, or any kind of interfaith dialogue, the Jedi, what would...
In this day and age, if you had a religion that had human sacrifices, would you be putting up with it? Even back in Old Testament times, in the Bible and whatever. All the way back in the Roman Empire, there was some pretty bad ones, but the whole point is that it's supposed to be better than that. But like, if you're thinking of it as a holistic thing of, should we let this religion practice their human sacrifices, then... I guess so. But, I mean, there's always going to be different philosophical takes on that as well. From a law point of thing, it would be counted as committing murder. So if you've got a nation that has a law against murder, then you wouldn't be able to practice that religion.
What do you expect them to be? They have to be cunning and devious even to survive. And if they, and again, the Jedi rule the galaxy. That's the way they frame it. And so Palpatine's like, once more, the Sith will rule the
I really didn't think through the example. It was just off the top of my head.
galaxy. Well, what difference does that make? It's just going to be a change in the religious order. It seems to be a spiritual war.
I mean, but that is the thing, though. Is like the Sith would take other people. It wouldn't just be their own people. And that's the point of why the Jedi take out the Sith.
That's being fought here. It doesn't seem to be a war for like political ideology. Neither side seem to have much interest in how the galaxy is actually run, the day-to-day bureaucracy. They seem to be concerned with the overall governing philosophy. And the overall governing philosophy of the Jedi is woefully inadequate, totally inconsistent, and is really quite anti-humanism. Like this is not accepting human beings as human beings, as having a both light and dark side, if we dare use the terms, a rational side and an.
But that's why they don't expect anyone other than Jedi to follow the Jedi code and the philosophy of the no attachment and that. Because the Jedi is supposed to be set apart from the world.
Emotional side that both need to be nurtured. Instead, they've gone full extremists, essentially to the left, and said, right, we are
It lines up with Christianity in that aspect.
going to completely suppress our animalistic emotional side. That to me is crazy. It seems, I mean, I think it would be very oppressive, and I don't think that you could ever demand that of a person and demand that kind of order and not have other consequences followed from it.
Oh, of course not. Of course they aren't celibate. Some of them have chosen to be, I think, or they've been in search of some, like Darth Bane seemed to be so in search of other things that he never ended up being with a woman, as far as it's written, that sort of thing. But obviously Sith didn't have this whole thing of, oh, you can't have attachments and you can't act on your passions. If anything, it would be more in line with the Sith to end up pushing themselves on people without consent. I mean, at least I can see where he's coming from. And I kind of get that a bunch of the stuff is in sort of new canon interpretation of things, which ticks me off because my whole understanding of Star Wars is from the expanded universe and it conflicts with it. That's why I'm like, they're two separate franchises at one point.